Xi Jinping reappears, rumored to be cooperating with new leadership while awaiting official resignation. On June 12, Xi Jinping, leader of the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, visited Babaoshan Cemetery once again to attend the funeral of a former vice state-level CCP leader. This marked his second appearance at Babaoshan in just 4 days, the previous one being for the funeral of Xu Qiliang, former vice chairman of the CCP's Central Military Commission. Rumors suggest that Xi has already lost power and is merely cooperating with the new leadership, awaiting the official announcement of his resignation. According to state media outlet Xinhua News Agency, Reti's body was cremated at Babaoshan Cemetery in Beijing on June 12. Xi Jinping, Premier Li Qiang, and the other 5 members of the CCP's Standing Committee were in attendance to bid farewell. Public records show that Reti was born in 1938 in Burong County, Nagku, Tibet. He joined the CCP in 1961 and later served as chairman of the Tibet CPPCC and of the Standing Committee of the People's Congress. In March 2003, he became vice chairman of the 10th National People's Congress, stepping down in March 2008. Reti died in Beijing on June 6 at the age of 87. He is the second vice state-level leader to pass away in recent days. Xu Qiliang died on June 2 at age 75. As the authorities have not disclosed the cause of Xu's death, and given the CCP's recent purges within the military leadership, speculation has arisen that his death may be linked to internal power struggles. Xu Qiliang was a trusted military ally of Xi Jinping. Several other military figures promoted by Xi, such as Miao Hua, director of the Political Work Department of the Central Military Commission, were investigated last year. Meanwhile, Vice Chairman He Weidong has disappeared for more than 3 months, with no word on his status. It is rumored that during the 3rd plenary session of the 18th Central Committee last year, Xi suffered a stroke and collapsed. Signs soon followed of his declining control over both the military and the party-state apparatus. Reports suggest that Zhang Yuxia, vice chairman of the Central Military Commission, has effectively taken over military power. Meanwhile, Xi's personnel chief, Li Ganjie, was unexpectedly transferred to the United Front Work Department in April, signaling a loss of control over party appointments. The Epoch Times, citing authoritative sources, reports that Xi remains in power in name only, while real influence has shifted. Figures like Wen Jiabao and Zhang Yuxia now play key roles in shaping China's political trajectory. The same sources say Xi began losing power in April last year. Although he attempted several counterattacks, including allegedly involving military threats, all failed. He is now said to be cooperating with the new leadership, playing his role, including during his visit to Russia in May. Multiple outlets have recently reported that Xi's resignation is all but finalized. The new leadership is actively consolidating power while preventing any counter-moves by Xi's allies. Commentator Xiao Shuojia noted that an internal consensus has already been reached for Xi to resign, officially due to health or other reasons, and be replaced. However, this must be formally communicated through a managed process. Another performance needs to be staged, the commentator said, but the real decisions have already been made behind the scenes. According to one whistleblower, once the resignation is officially announced, the new leadership will allow Xi to make 1 or 2 final appearances to ensure he exits with dignity. He will then be closely monitored to prevent any attempts at retaliation. Commentator Li Dayu recently stated on social media, "Xi Jinping has long lost power and influence. Sources with access to top-level military discussions have revealed that China's political landscape is about to undergo a seismic shift by the end of June. A secret mid-June meeting will finalize the future successor. Wang Yang and Hu Chunhua have been so busy lately their feet can't keep up with their heads." Recently, overseas rumors suggest that former Politburo Standing Committee member Wang Yang may return to the political arena and take on a key leadership role during the transition period. Sources indicate that his return comes with 3 specific conditions: restoring military influence, adjusting foreign policy, and initiating institutional reforms. This move is seen as a cautious and strategic decision rather than an idealistic reform effort. These conditions reportedly sparked intense debate during the expanded Politburo meeting in May, with some officials comparing the atmosphere to the ideological shifts of the 1980s. Among the conditions, military influence is seen as crucial. Without real control over the military, any political arrangement would lack stability. Multiple sources say senior military leaders are considering creating a new position, vice chairman of the National Security Council, for Wang Yang, and reviving an older structure in which the General Secretary does not also serve as chairman of the Central Military Commission. This would mark a significant shift away from the current concentration of power.
China's economic decline is unstoppable. In order to stimulate the continuously declining economy, the Chinese government has recently introduced many fiscal and monetary policy measures. Although the stock markets in China and Hong Kong experienced a short-lived boom under the Chinese government's loose monetary policy, the rise in the stock market is only a flash in the pan without changing China's industrial economic structure and investment environment. In other words, the market value of Chinese-listed companies is unlikely to increase if the trend of China's economic recession cannot be reversed. As far as the Chinese real estate market is concerned, this column has explained in the article, Reasonable Expectation of Further Decline in Chinese Real Estate Prices, that the People's Bank of China's stimulus policy for real estate is unlikely to change the trend of continued decline in Chinese real estate prices. To be fair, the main reason for this column's pessimism about China's economic prospects is that China's economy is deflationary. Of course, many people often compare China with Japan's economy, which faced deflation and insufficient demand in the past. However, in addition to the significant difference in the degree of economic development between China and Japan, the difference in the political system between democratic and communist countries will lead to major differences in economic development. This is also emphasized by Darren Acemoglu, Simon Johnson, and James A. Robinson, winners of the 2024 Nobel Prize in Economics. Political and economic systems are closely related to national prosperity. Since Deng Xiaoping's reform and opening up, changes in China's economic system have gradually improved China's economy, and people's living standards have gradually improved. Even major countries in the world have regarded China as an important export market. However, after the rise of Chinese President Xi Jinping, the credibility of China's economic and legal systems has been greatly reduced, leading to a continuous decrease in foreign investment in China. Therefore, the decline of China's economy is closely related to Xi Jinping's destruction of the legal system and economic environment. Since Mr. Xi took power, the Chinese economy has gone through many periods of complete shutdown. During the 2 years of Mr. Xi's zero-COVID policy, all trade was halted. And recently, due to many politically sensitive policies, many foreign corporations, businesses, and individuals are afraid of being held hostage in case conflicts arise. As a result, they have massively withdrawn capital and left the Chinese market. The Chinese government's destruction of the market mechanism has caused a continuous decrease in Chinese consumer demand. According to the economic data released by the National Bureau of Statistics on the 13th of this month, China's Consumer Price Index, CPI, in September increased by 0.4% year-on-year, lower than in August. Since the beginning of this year, although China's Consumer Price Index has grown better than last year, the extent of its price increase is extremely limited. When the annual growth rate of the Consumer Price Index is low, as long as the price of products with a large consumption proportion falls, the annual growth rate may be negative. In other words, China's current domestic consumption power is insufficient. When consumers expect the economy to be pessimistic, it is very difficult for government policies to produce results. In addition, the Producer Price Index, PPI, in September fell by 2.8% year-on-year, the largest drop in 6 months. China's PPI has experienced negative growth for 24 consecutive months, showing that the ex-factory prices of Chinese products are continuing to decline, closely related to China's overproduction problem. Finally, in the face of China's insufficient demand, many economic organizations and forecasting agencies have successively announced that they do not believe China's economic growth rate can reach the target of 5%. However, as the People's Bank of China and the Ministry of Finance have successively announced loose monetary and fiscal policies, the Chinese government may still stimulate the economy by introducing more funds into the market, thereby allowing China's economy to reach the target of 5%. However, as Adam Smith, the father of economics, pointed out, the reason for a country's economic growth is the level of productivity. When a country's productivity is higher, the country's economic growth will also be better. However, if the government's policies cannot achieve the effect of improving productivity or increasing research and development, the government's expansionary policies may only leave a negative impact of increased debt. Therefore, when we observe the health of China's economy, in addition to paying attention to changes in economic figures, we must also consider the opportunity cost of its policy implementation to form a more accurate judgment on the prospects of China's economy. China's third-quarter GDP growth hits weakest pace since early 2023. Although the CCP often publishes dishonest figures and is often accused of fabricating them to improve the country's image, official figures released by the CCP on October 18th showed that China's economy grew by 4.6% year-on-year in the third quarter of this year, the slowest growth since early 2023. Among these, the situation in the real estate industry is particularly bad. Compared with the figures previously released by the National Bureau of Statistics of China, GDP in the first quarter of this year increased by 5.3% year-on-year, and the second quarter increased by 4.7%, while the third quarter growth rate announced on Friday further declined to 4.6%. It can be seen that even according to the data released by the CCP itself, China's economy has been below the CCP's 5% growth target for 2 consecutive quarters. In the first 3 quarters of this year, China's economic growth was only 4.8% year-on-year. The economic data released by the CCP has been questioned by the outside world for being inflated. The real estate industry is sluggish and exports are slowing down. In the first 3 quarters, China's industrial output increased by 5.8% year-on-year, and retail sales increased by 3.3%. However, real estate investment fell by 10.1% from the same period last year, and new home sales plummeted by 22.7%, showing that the real estate market is still in a state of deep adjustment and bottoming out. Because 70% of Chinese household wealth is concentrated in real estate, and the industry accounted for a quarter of the economy at its peak. These latest figures show that consumers' willingness to spend remains subdued. Despite multiple rounds of policy support measures by the Communist Party of China over the past year, the real estate market shows no signs of recovery. Data on Friday showed that China's new home prices fell at the fastest pace since May 2015. China's crude steel output fell for the 4th consecutive month in September, failing to meet expectations of a rebound in construction material purchases. In addition, the key export sector, the only bright spot in the economy, has begun to show cracks, with shipment growth slowing sharply last month. Earlier this week, figures released by China Customs showed that exports slowed sharply in September, rising only 2.4% in dollar terms from a year earlier, down from 8.7% year-on-year growth in August. Imports were also weak, rising only 0.3%, both significantly below expectations. This suggests that manufacturers are slashing prices to clear inventory before multiple trading partners impose tariffs. China has always relied on infrastructure and manufacturing investment, consumption, and exports to drive economic growth, but investment has stalled, consumption has deteriorated, and now even exports have fallen. Economist: no surprises. Bruce Pang, chief economist at JLL, told Reuters, China's data for the third quarter of 2024 is not optimistic. Considering weak domestic demand, the real estate market is still struggling, and export growth is slowing, This performance is in line with market expectations. Earlier, a Reuters survey showed that economists expected China's economy to grow 4.5% year-on-year in the third quarter. The Reuters survey also showed that economists expected China's economy to grow by 4.8% in 2024, lower than Beijing's target, and growth may fall further to 4.5% in 2025. Increasing deflationary pressures. China has been dealing with deflationary pressures since the beginning of last year, and some economists believe recent data shows these pressures are increasing. As the outlook for exports, the only bright spot in the economy this year, seems to have dimmed under foreign trade restrictions by several major trading partners. The worrying weakening of export momentum has further increased pressure on Beijing to take measures to stimulate demand. The GDP data confirms that China is facing a situation of oversupply and insufficient demand. China is considered to have fallen into full-blown deflation, said Toru Nishihama, chief economist at Dai-ichi Life Research Institute in Tokyo. China has introduced a series of measures in recent weeks aimed at stimulating the economy, including lowering mortgage rates for existing homes and allowing banks to increase lending by reducing reserve requirements. However, industry insiders believe that most of these measures are piecemeal. China observers have repeatedly stressed the need for authorities to address long-term structural challenges such as overcapacity, high debt levels, and an aging population.